Hi, I'm Shell Presto. I'm an artist. I draw a lot, as you can see by my little sample there. Um, and usually I would draw traditionally, but one of my newer personal goals is to try to draw digitally more often. So I figured I would share my comic process with you. Um, so I'll go over layouts on this one. As you can see, I've got a whole bunch of blocks of text on the page. And I've done comics before. I've only had one published, and it was a comic about mice for the National Grange of all things, which was a fun project to do. Um, but I've done various comic pages for myself or things that I have laying around unpublished. And one of the bigger problems I've always had was I know what the drawings are going to look like, but then I do the drawings and I try to fit the text in, and you end up doing cutting or working around and whatnot, and it can be a mess. So the first thing that I would say is, if you're trying to lay out a comic page, is to put the text on the page. I used to do thumbnails and then put the text in last after everything was drawn, but I found I have a much easier time laying out pages once I put the text on first. And then I sort of draw around the text because then I know where it's going to go. So you can see I've started drawing my character here, and I'm resizing him to fit him where I want the text bubbles to be. So the software I'm using here is Manga Studio, which I believe is now called Clip Studio Paint, but I obviously have an older version. And I suppose I should say what's going on a bit in this particular comic. So I am the artist, sometimes writer, and always co-creator of the Ascension Epoch. That's a shared universe for heroic adventure fiction that my husband and I created. And we've got books out in the series, book books, prose novels. And they do have illustrations, and they have been published. So some of our characters are called the East End Irregulars, and they are a teen superhero team in Pittsburgh. And so I'm drawing Torrent and the Mysterious X exploring Pittsburgh, and right now they're walking in the woods. So obviously there's buildup in stories, and one of the things that I've had to deal with this particular story is that for the first maybe fifth of the story, they're just walking through the woods. So you get into that thing where you want to have some change-ups and some, dynamics. You don't just want to have one head talking and another head talking and one head talking and another head talking. So I've been trying to change up the perspective, make sure I don't use the same camera angles twice on them, and things like that. So Manga Studio is really excellent for laying out comics, for creating panels, for creating text balloons. And you'll see I'm not using that yet because right now I literally just have text on the page, and I'm drawing some sketches on a couple different layers here. Once I get the sketches done, I will move them over into their separate sort of panel containers or panel folders. But I didn't want to create the panels in advance and get ahead of myself, because as you're arranging dialogue, everything can change. And I think the hardest thing is making sure that you get that left to right sort of Z or zigzag pattern to your text. So you can see now I'm playing with, if I want this entire block of text here, if that's too much text to be in that area in particular, I actually end up breaking it up and putting it into another panel. And then once again, I get into that. I don't want just Torrent and Mysterious X talking at each other this entire time. So right now he's talking about his girlfriend, Ava, who he recently met at school, and they had an argument. But before that, they shared some information over their personal computers, their Mobies, and he got a profile from her on MetaFriends. And a MetaFriends profile is a weird thing to share because it's an anonymous website or grid node for people with talents. So he's talking to Mysterious X about whether it was likely that someone would share their MetaFriends profile with you upon first meeting you, and obviously Mysterious X says no. But I didn't just want to show them talking about it because that would be really easy to do and also kind of boring. So in this one, I decided to break up these panels of their conversation and actually show Torrent in his civilian guise as Sebastian bumping his wrist Moby with Ava's personal computer Moby. So you can see I'm drawing a close-up of their hands there to emphasize it. And also because people being introduced to this story through the comics aren't going to know what a Moby is, because in the East End Irregulars books, it's a novel, so we have a lot of time to explain all these things. And in a comic, you want to be a bit more condensed and a bit more telling or showing instead of telling. So that's a good illustrative way to sort of have a little flashback there and give a little more information to the reader. And that's the other difficult thing about laying out a comic. A lot of times something's going on literally, but you need to change it up and keep things visually interesting to your readers. And I know, like, if you're doing, say, a romance manga or something like that, a lot of times it is just, you know, faces from different perspectives or long shots or a lot of information coming from the character's face. So you have long, drawn-out conversations. And that works for that medium. The other thing when you're doing a superhero or an action comic or something like that is that you're dealing with characters in masks. So you can't see it from the blue lines because I haven't put the clothing and costumes on, but right now I'm drawing Mysterious X, and the original text from the book had him you know, doing a low whistle before he says she screwed up, she must have screwed up in sharing that profile with you, you know, one of those whew. And Mysterious X wears a scarf, a big one, like you know, inspired by the Shadow and older superheroes of yore. So I can't draw him whistling because he has his costume on right now and his scarf will be up. So I had to exaggerate the pose for him. So he's got his head tilted, you know, he's holding his chin like he's thinking about it. And that's what you sometimes have to do in comics when there's restrictions on you, like costumes and whatnot. I suppose it might be worth saying that I've done digital coloring and some digital painting in Photoshop for a while now, but it wasn't until I got Manga Studio that I was able to start drawing on the computer, like doing blue lines and inks and stuff like that. And I'm still trying to get the hang of it, but I'm enjoying it a lot. Manga Studio or Clip Studio Paint in particular has like a stabilization setting that makes it easier to draw lines that don't have jitter in them. When I would draw in Photoshop, I would get a lot of jitter or squiggle in my lines even if I wasn't doing it with my hand, or I couldn't tell I was doing it. So the stabilization in Manga Studio really made a difference. So now we're coming up on an example of panels that just didn't work. The original text in After Dark, the prose novel that contains this story, had this passage that said, Sebastian chewed his lip. That was more or less his opinion as well. He'd been struggling over how to approach Evangeline about it ever since he'd discovered that she'd shared her MetaFriend's profile link with him when they exchanged contact info. He couldn't decide how to respond to it. If he told her about it and she hadn't intended to share it with him, she would probably panic, and their relationship was already strained. On the other hand, if she had intended to share it with him and he just ignored it, how would that make her feel? So obviously there's a lot of thought going on in Torrn's mind, and there's no dialogue there, but it's an important pause or an important moment. So I was going to originally do the him chewing his lip pretty large, just to like focus on that moment. And then I didn't like how that looked. It seemed kind of jarring to just have it there and large. And I didn't think you could really get that he was thinking. So then I pulled back and I was like, oh, I'll show his face. But that just didn't seem right either. It was like, I thought, you know, when you have that moment when you're thinking alone and you're sort of lost in your own thoughts, even when someone's with you, because in this case, Mysterious X is with him, you still feel isolated. So I thought to capture that moment of thought instead, I cut the idea of a close-up, and instead I do a far shot of Sebastian sort of in his own thoughts and having that moment where he's distracted and he's obviously not thinking about crime fighting. And it's just sort of him and his thoughts and his shadow in the woods in that one moment. And it kicks right back up into action on the next page, and Mysterious X bothers him again, of course. But I thought that this captured the feel much better. So if you've made it this far, thanks, because this is my first video. And also I'd like to apologize. I recorded this at a slightly lower quality because I was trying to stream at the time. The follow-up video, which will go over adding details and inking, is going to be followed up and will be at a higher quality. Obviously, this is still a work in progress, so I don't have a nice finished shot to show, but we'll get to that in a future video. And in the meantime, I'm on a whole bunch of social medias if you want to check out more of my artwork. And thank you for watching. Hope you'll watch my future videos, and have an awesome day.